How did you launch him 80 feet in the air?
You told me to boat flip him!
I didn't tell you to launch him 78 feet in the air.
I flipped him in the boat, didn't I?
Send it to the moon.
I sent it! You said boat flip him!
Oh, yeah.
Do you fish? No. You know, people who don't fish think that fishing is lazy or boring, but it is the complete opposite. There are 100 little decisions to be made, variables to be considered, and you're never quite sure what made the difference. Did I cast too high, too far to the left? Did I reel it in too slow or too fast? Is the lure too shiny or too dull? Do I stay here or should I go over there? And you know it's not luck, but you do not know by how much. Because I am never disappointed out here, because I don't expect anything, because anything is possible. I can be hopeful out here, even in failure. Because I know if I just go out there around that tree, it might be different. Something might be different. Something I do might make a difference.
On my property, you didn't win shit in my yard.
Wait.
All of you.
Daddy, chill.
What the hell is even that?
You're listening to Fishing the DMV with your host, Thomas Ahrens. Fishing the DMV is brought to you by Jake's Bait and Tackle, located in Winchester, Virginia.
If that doesn't get you jacked up, I don't know what will.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Monday Night Live. We are here. We are the halfway point through April, and it's been an absolutely crazy April. I feel like every weekend the weather has been bad, and then it's beautiful Monday through Friday when everyone's at work. Last weekend, I was actually down at Lake Anna, and it decided to blow about 180 miles an hour on the lake for 2 days straight. Beautiful weather if you just took away the wind. But hopefully as we get through here and later on into April, the weather will start maybe behaving a little bit better. And we can actually get outside and enjoy some things. This show is a little bit different than our usual Monday Night Lives. As you guys know that I'm on the Black Bass Advisory Board for Maryland. Last week, we kind of did something with Mr. Captain Steve Chickahominy talking about what's going on in Maryland. And then we followed that up with an episode on the smallmouth fish hatchery program that was in Maryland for the past 5 years and went through that. I thought that this is perfect to cap that off with Virginia and what has been going on in the tidal water fisheries as well. This is an absolutely awesome opportunity to get your questions answered live and to help incentivize this, thanks to all of my sponsors. I'm going to be giving away prizes throughout the night to people that actually ask really good questions. I will pull them up on screen to get them answered. So ask a good question, you'll win a prize courtesy of Jake's Bait and Tackle located in Winchester, Virginia. So without a moment ado, I'm going to bring on each guest one-on-one or one at a time, let them introduce themselves, and then we can kind of get going with this as well. So I guess we have to start with, the man, the myth, legend. He's been on the show about 4 or 5 times. Everyone knows him. Everyone loves him. John, how are you doing tonight, sir? I'm
very well. Thank you, Thomas. How are you?
I'm just so glad that we were able to make this work. I'm really excited for tonight. I really am. I think everyone knows you, but Cliff Note, who are you for the people that are listening that don't know who you are?
I'm a district fisheries biologist, work out in Northern Virginia district, been in the Fredericksburg office for a long, long time. Manage with Mike Eisel, we manage the Northern district, which is Lake Anna, north, basically up to the urban jungle. And then we go as far west as Skyline Drive. So we have a really cool district in that we go from the mountains, the brook trout water, all the way to the tidal section. So we have a diversity of resources that keeps us busy, but we have a good time managing that. And then, of course, the snakehead thing fell on my lap in 2004, so we made some hay with that.
I would also like to say that I think it took 34, 35 pounds to win at Occoquan Reservoir, the first tournament of the year for that place. That place, the amount of 7-pounders, and if I wasn't there to witness it, I would say you're lying. It's insane what that place is doing.
I've been telling people for years the Occoquan Reservoir is the stuff. It's the best. When we rank our bass fisheries for a Bass magazine for years running, it has been the #1 in the state. It's extraordinary. The ding on Occoquan Reservoir for years was you could catch all the 2 to 5s you wanted, and people complained and bitched about it. And now all of a sudden, and I can't explain why, the habitat hadn't really changed like it has in, say, the tidal Rappahannock or Lake Anna, but for whatever reason, I can't tell you why. And now those fish are all, like, not all, but there's a lot of 3 to 7s and then some over 7. So it shifted up inexplicably, but I love it.
Yep. Sometimes you just got to just smile on good fortune.
Yeah.
The next up on this all-star cast, I get the first time on the show. And again, as always, you guys, I'm terrible with names, but I always give it a college try. So Margie Whitmore. Margie, thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's Margie, but good,
Margie.
Really good effort.
Again, just for the audience at home, just tell them a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm the Tidal Rivers Fisheries biologist for Virginia. So I kind of coordinate research and monitoring on all of our tidal rivers, minus the Potomac, obviously. Region 4, which is John, takes care of that. So yeah, I work a lot with bass. I work a lot with blue catfish, starting to work a little bit more with sturgeon. So pretty much whatever the management priority is, I get to work on it and try to solve the problem.
How long have you been in the position for?
I just started in 2020. So this is going on my 4th year.
Oh, cool.
So still pretty new.
Is the sturgeon, that's such a, I haven't heard that in a lot of my conversations. How big of a, not a priority is probably the wrong word, focus, because that's really interesting and a unique species to monitor.
Yeah, so VCU has done a lot of the work with Atlantic sturgeon and the James system. NOAA has done, and Chesapeake Scientific has done a lot of the work in the Pamunkey. Now we're kind of have a little bit of a handle on the James and trying to kind of spread out into other rivers and get a handle on those populations. So very early stages in that, but I'm looking forward to seeing that work progress and seeing if we can kind of get a better handle on the data in other populations. But yeah, again, very, very beginning stages for some other systems.
Oh, that's going to be so cool to talk about. And again, guys, as always, ask a question, you're going to win a prize. The third one to round out this trio, we talked a little bit to him actually at the Richmond Fishing Expo. I got him on for about 20 minutes. Now we can do a little bit more long form. He's a little shy, but let's give him a welcome. Scott Herman, how are you doing tonight, Scott?
All right. How's it going? Thanks for having us all on.
Same thing. Like, just give everyone just a little rundown that are watching right now. Who are you and how'd you get into this crazy thing?
Yeah, it's my name's Scott Herman. I've been working with the Department of Wildlife Resources for quite some time. Shoot, March of 1998. Not as long as Odenkirk, of course, but different positions for a few years in Farmville, then up to Fredericksburg, and then as a fisheries biologist since about November of 2004. So Region 1 out of the Charles City County office, basically keeping busy with a lot of the lakes and reservoirs and public resources from the James River on up to the Northern Neck. Mind you, we don't have too many lakes up on the Northern Neck. You got a few options up there, but most of my action and responsibilities are pretty much around, Chickahominy Lake, Diaskin Reservoir, a lot of the Newport News municipality waters. We got Lake Chesney, is pretty much one of my higher profile bass fisheries there, and been keeping busy the last few years on the Piankatank River as well as the Tidal Rappahannock below Port Royal.
There's so much. We're going to make sure we get into all that tonight as well. For everyone listening right now, we got about 50 people kind of pulling in here. Again, if you want to watch us on YouTube, that's the easiest place to leave comments. But we're also on Instagram, Twitter, X, I guess is what it's called now, and about 3 different Facebook groups. Please share and like this out. It really helps out in the algorithm. Basically, what we're going to be doing tonight, I have a PowerPoint presentation up on one of my other monitors here, and we're going to be going through it. And I think as I share my screen here, really give a rundown, I guess, for people that aren't in the know on how these studies are conducted, just kind of like a mile-high overview of how all this information in this data is collected. And I will share my screen. Perfect. All right, cool. We got the screen up. Hopefully everyone can see it as we get into this bad boy. So yeah, whoever would like to go about this first, like how is this collected?
So, hey, Thomas, I'll step in here for a minute and just sort of give a secondary intro, and then we'll hand off to Margie. She put most of these slides together, especially regarding the James system. But I think as we go through this, it's incumbent for people to sort of recognize that most of these data collections are long-term temporal data sets, which are very valuable for assessing the fishery. And then the sort of unique thing about, well, first off, I want to give a shout out to Margie for number one. It was her brainchild to be a little bit more proactive. It seems like a lot of times when we're given public presentations, it's because the fishery sucks for whatever reason, and people are pissed. And so we end up sort of being on the defensive because people are saying, like, what's happening, what's wrong, we want you to stock because of this, that, or, whatever. And so we've been through a few of these meetings over the years, and about a year ago, Margie decided, hey, it's a good idea. Let's be, proactive about this. Let's get out and if it's whether it's good, bad, or average, let's just tell people what's going on and what we're doing, what we're seeing, and how we're doing it. So that brainchild resulted in February 22nd, I think it was, the first Tidal Bass Summit, she dubbed it, which was a great idea and brought a lot of anglers out, tournament fishermen, and just, people that were concerned about the resource, and got to hear about, the different tidal rivers in Virginia. The Potomac wasn't really included because that's Maryland water, although we do a lot of extensive monitoring in our tributaries of the tidal Potomac, which is kind of setting that aside for now. So depending on the biologist, each biologist is up to a fair amount of his or her discretion to collect data as they see fit, with input from the supervisor and whatever. So not all of these data packages are the same. Some of them were collected different means over different time periods, different methods. I mean, they all involve boat electrofishing, but in terms of the timing, the sequence, the amount of runs, all this is different, but what we try to do is maximize the time we're on the water to get statistically valid information that allow us to make informed management decisions over time about the status of the resource. What's the reproduction, what's the abundance. These are the primary things that we're concerned about and anglers are concerned about, because we work for the anglers. We want fishing to be good. And so if it's not good, we want to understand why. And if it means stocking to get it better, then yeah. If it means figure out how to do something with habitat, which in tidal rivers is pretty much impossible, but at least it's good to understand if there's a problem, then we can explain that and maybe either temper expectations or let the anglers understand what's happening. So to me, that's a huge part of this. And then you stepped in and, we couldn't live stream that event in February. And you said, hey, what about a redo where we could kind of put some of this information out to people that couldn't make it to Bowling Green in, late February. And that was a great idea. So thanks to you and thanks to Margie, we're here tonight. And so I just wanted to put that out there. And then I think as we go through, Margie's going to talk about a couple of the rivers that she's primarily, working on. And then Scott's going to talk a little bit about some his experiences on a different system. And then we'll finish up talking about the Rappahannock. And we could obviously go on for hours and hours and hours, but we're going to try to move through it fairly fast and give you a sketch about what's happening. And most of it's pretty good news, at least as far as we're concerned. So, yeah. So I guess, Margie, do you want to start with your PowerPoint?
Sure. And I just want to say that, John makes some really good points about, how these data need to be comparable. And a lot of my job when I came in here is, kind of looking at all of the tidal rivers together is how can we kind of make it so these surveys are more comparable? So before they were so different in every river, it was really hard to compare them to each other and over time. And so a big part of my job the past 4 years has been to kind of standardize how we're doing sampling. So that now we can kind of compare the work that John's doing above Port Royal with what Scott's doing below Port Royal, and, compare the York to the Chickahominy, et cetera. So that being said, I'm going to kind of go through these slides and they are going to be a little graph heavy, but one of the things I want y'all to keep in mind is that, and I'll point out on the graphs where it's happened is, we had this sample design shift that on some of the graphs makes it look like, numbers have tanked, but it's the numbers are good. It's just kind of a function of how the sampling design changed. So, yeah, great job kind of explaining that, John, because that is kind of a big part of, how these numbers will present themselves. So, these are mostly still the same slides from the Tidal Bass Summit that we had in person. This year was really us beta testing the idea. We had no idea what it was going to be like. We had a last minute venue change that made things like live streaming seem crazy complicated. But I really think next year, kind of knowing more what to expect and having a blueprint that, would be more feasible to do that. So I want to thank you guys for this opportunity because as John mentioned, being able to have open lines of communication with the anglers is huge. I'm really big on transparency and kind of letting everybody know what we're doing and why. So this is just a really great venue and I appreciate it. But all right, so I'll start running through the slides. The first one is just the meeting outline, but starting with the James River, if you could pull up the first James slide.
Yep.
Cool. So again, we changed the sample design in 2021. And you can kind of see that. I wish I had a mouse because I like to point at visuals a lot. So I gesture. But so you can see how we separated out between adults and juveniles on that graph on the right. And that's measuring catch per unit effort. And what that is how many bass we catch per hour of electrofishing. So this is really an index that helps us compare, population over time. So you can see 2021, you see these kind of very high adult numbers, very low juvenile numbers, and that kind of yo-yos back and forth. 2021 and 2022 were kind of wonky years. We were really just working on this transition into the new design. And just for background, the old design was a fixed station design, and that meant that the same sites or group of sites would be sampled every year. We changed that to a stratified random sampling design, and that shift is so that we can more easily compare samples. So when you're going to a fixed site that was selected because it has really good bass habitat, it's biased, right? So you're gonna get a lot of bass. And when you're getting a lot of bass, all of those collections are going to be biased towards larger individuals. And so that's just human nature. We all want to see the big fish. It's exciting. But it tends to underestimate the smaller size classes and especially the juveniles. And so if you're having an issue in the population, it can be kind of hard to detect it, especially with recruitment. So kind of shifting to this random design, it means that, because it's not biased towards really good bass habitat, you're going to see those numbers decrease. So you're going to see fewer adults. The juvenile numbers are going to shift. I wasn't really sure how that would work out. But it gives you an idea of what the whole population is doing, because it's not biased towards good habitat. It's all habitat in the whole river. So it's more of a general overview of the whole population. And, when you see decreases in young of year juveniles, then that's kind of a good representation of what's happening in the population. So if you're seeing low numbers, then, that's something to be concerned about. Or if you're seeing adult numbers tank, that's something to be concerned about. But in this transitional...
Oh, I'm sorry to put you off. So I think we're going to do, since all the questions are pouring in, just to make sure that since they are kind of with the topic, I will select a few questions and butt in every now and then, because this is an interesting one from Brandon. Brandon says, does the stocking of F1s affect the data? Brandon, do you mean just because how many you put in there? Like, a little bit more information would be great in the chat. But anyway.
So you'll see that in the next slide when you go into the Chickahominy is, you will see how the stocking kind of bumped up those numbers in the short term, but kind of petered out in the long term. And that's kind of typical of what you would expect in stocking in like a tidal system. We don't expect really like a long-term boost, more of a short-term boost, and you're hoping to kind of have that contribute to the stocking biomass long-term, but doesn't always work out that way. Tidal systems are really finicky, as you all know. But just kind of getting back to the James, 2022 had Hurricane Ian, so that really threw a wrench in our sampling across the board. So 2023 was, the first year that, we had this thing figured out. The design shift was kind of fully done. And we got a lot of pedal time on all of the rivers. So, you'll see this in pretty much all of the graphs for these rivers where, 2021 and 22 low wonky kind of evens out in 23. And I expect, going forward, we'll see those trends, be more representative. So, numbers pretty good in the James, down for sure. Again, that could be just a remnant from the design shift, but the population is really good. We saw some really nice size individuals, a lot of juveniles. The spring water temperatures from 2023 were a little wonky. So, going forward, we're going to do some more juvenile surveys just to make sure recruitment is looking strong. But just looking at that size distribution, and that's like the number of fish per length bin. And that those juvenile numbers are looking really good. So based on that, I'm happy and looking forward. I'm optimistic, but the James has been pretty steady.
That's really
so cool. We can move. Yeah, so we can move to the Chickahominy unless anybody has any.
And then we have a couple pouring in. We're gonna go with Everett. Everett, if I got your name right, send me. You want a gift card to Jake's Bait and Tackle? Please message me on Facebook, Instagram, or email me fishingthedmv.com to get that gift card. Why did you change the sample design?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's like what I was saying before, where it was it's so that we can look at more population level changes and compare them both over time into different systems. So when we were doing the fixed station design before, you can really only look at the James River, sample sites, from, last year to this year, kind of over time. But again, you're going to have those samples biased towards larger individuals. And because you're doing the same fixed sites, you kind of, you might miss some things if something's off with a site. If you're sampling it at high tide or low tide, that it might exacerbate differences in the results. So having a stratified random sample, and John is way better at explaining the stat side of this than I am. But it basically just, it helps you compare samples better over time into other systems without bias. And that's what we want, because when we see, something going really well or really poorly in a system. We want to have trust in that result so that we can effectively manage these populations.
Oh, perfect. Awesome. And then so let's move on to the next slide. Sorry about that. And then, yeah, keep the questions coming. If anyone else wants to come off mute on the chat because they see something that you want to talk about, more the merrier.
Yeah, so Chickahominy. So what I was saying about in the stocking is, so the last stocking was in 2015 or 2016, I believe. And so you can see as you're moving closer to 2020, you can see kind of this big boost in adults that, again, in 2020, that was the last year that we did the fixation design. And because the Chickahominy population is just always booming, that biased high kind of size distribution, that effect is really strong in the Chickahominy. So that kind of explains how that big boost in adult abundance. And then when you're looking at it decreasing after, that's when we shift to the next design, right? So that's not an actual drop in adults. That's just, us hitting less biased habitat. So, when you're looking at 21, 22, and 23 in the Chickahominy, those are, again, Hurricane Ian in 2022. So we didn't get as much sampling in as we wanted to, but that's kind of the trajectory that looks good to me. And I'm happy to see that, 50, fish per hour is really good. Juveniles on the rise, looks good. Again, 2023 water temperatures were a little bit wonky. So we're going to keep an eye on that. Make sure recruitment is still good. If you look at the size distribution, it's a little bit lower than we've had in the past for juveniles. So again, it's still a really good number. It's not something I'm worried about, but it is something that I want to keep an eye on because, making sure that these populations are constantly recruiting and looking good is, that's really important. We don't mess around with our tidal bass populations. So if anybody has questions about that, otherwise I'm going to go over a tagging project really quick before moving on to the York.
Here we go. Perfect.
Cool. So this project is a couple years old, but I want to touch on it just because this was an issue that was really big in the fishing forums. Everybody was talking about it. I was hearing a lot about it, which was having tournaments go out of Osborne on the James River and go fish in the Chickahominy River, bring them back to the James and release them. And there was a lot of concern that this was kind of funneling fish out of the Chickahominy and decreasing that population. We were getting a lot of questions about it and we didn't have any answers. We said, the numbers are still good. We don't think it's affecting it. But we realized we really don't have a number to put to that, what we're calling translocation. So we did a tagging study. We tagged about 650 largemouth bass over 12 inches, like tournament minimum. We tagged them in the Chickahominy ahead of the Bassmaster out of Osborne. And then also before the TBF Eastern Regional out of Chickahominy Riverfront. We had a couple different questions, one of which was, what's the rate of translocation from the Chickahominy to the James River? Is it significant enough to impact the Chickahominy population? The other one was, could this possibly be a dispersal mechanism for Alabama bass, which at the time, this was really the beginnings of the scare in the Chickahominy. And so we were really concerned about them getting out of the Chickahominy, moving to the upstream James and affecting smallmouth populations. So, we also wanted to see if this could be a mechanism for dispersing Alabama bass. You can go to the next slide. So first thing is we got a ton of reports. I think our reporting rate was like 18%, which normally for, anglers calling and reporting tags, it's usually in the single digits. And a lot of that was because we reached out to our local anglers and they were really engaged in the project. So shout out to anybody who reported a fish because we had other fish biologists like not believing our reporting rates because it was so absurdly high. So what we found through the project and like looking at the map, the color is of the dots is kind of meaningless, but basically the lighter the color, that is the latest recapture that we got. So anglers would report fish that they caught and we would kind of make note of the location. And then on top of that, we were also at the weigh-ins for the Bassmaster Open and the TBF Eastern Regional. And we were collecting tag information from anybody that brought one in their bags. So we only saw 3.4% of our tagged fish come through these weigh-ins as part of the tournaments, and outside tournaments, it was only 0.3%.
Whoa.
I was expecting at least 5%. And we didn't even really come close. And so in order to start looking at something that might impact the population as a whole, you're looking at like above 10%, probably something closer to like 15%, depending on the system. So this is a really good number. I also want to say is we only had one Alabama bass come through the Bassmaster Open weigh-in, and I don't even want to count it because it was an angler who knew it was an Alabama bass and terminated it and brought it in for a fin clip to DWR. And so it was actually a really good demonstration of, you know, our guidance and our cooperation with angling clubs at work. So that was really awesome to see. The graph on the right is just kind of a displacement distance. So the amount of distance between each relocation point. So unsurprisingly, fish that were reported in the James, there's a lot more distance covered, right? Because they're moving from the Chickahominy to the James. But the Chickahominy was actually higher than I thought it would be. And that's because, you know, the fishing pressure in the Chickahominy is high. A lot of the fish that were reported were actually caught and released multiple times. So that was really cool to see. I was hoping to kind of get at a pattern of dispersal after fish are released, but for a lot of the fish that were, you know, caught again and again, it was such tight time turnarounds that we couldn't really get at a pattern of dispersal. But what's interesting in general is that a lot of fish were, you know, released generally in the area that they were caught, except for a handful that ended up in the James and one that actually took a trip all the way to Osborne and then ended up back in the Chickahominy. I'm assuming that's a couple boat rides. But it was really good to see that, you know, translocation wasn't really a big issue. And, you know, the type of engagement that we got as part of this project. So that's that.
That fish only made that movement because he was probably caught again, correct?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So a lot of times people will catch. So if they were released like above and below Osborne as part of a tournament, some folks actually will target, you know, release areas during other tournaments. And so you see like there's one dot way up the Appomattox. So there's also bass tournaments out of the Appomattox. So I'm thinking that, you know, some folks were maybe targeting areas in the vicinity of release sites, picked it back up, took another boat ride back to the Chickahominy, and that one took a trip to the Appomattox, possibly for weigh-ins. So, yeah, really interesting to see though, because the odds of that fish getting caught again and then relocated back to the Chickahominy are really small.
Brandon, so we only catch the stupid fish. That's a spot on, boss. Anyway, we'll go to the next slide.
I would say that fish that are more aggressive are more likely to be caught. So we'll say they're curious, not dumb.
That's an interesting perspective. Yeah, either way.
Silver linings.
Let's see. I'm on the next slide. This is no wait. Okay, next one. Here we go. Perfect. So this is the James, the Chickahominy monitoring.
Yeah, so this is just kind of going through the other stuff that we have going on in the James and Chickahominy. We, you know, we'll regularly get reports of Alabama bass will go out, we'll monitor. We haven't really found any additional Alabama bass that have been confirmed in the James or the Chickahominy. We're constantly monitoring though. We've gotten a few reports on northern snakehead. They've turned out to be bowfin, once a flathead catfish. So we haven't confirmed their presence, but you know, we always monitor for them. We did in the spring and fall 2023, got some reports of lesions on bass. So that's something that we monitored, and we are partnering with VIMS to, you know, keep an eye on the health of the fishery in the James and the Chickahominy. It looks like last year it was a combination of stressors from, you know, wonky spring temperatures, a delayed spawn, probably stress from, you know, catch and release, and, you know, just environmental stressors. So it doesn't look like it was anything serious. It was just kind of a normal bacteria that's present in all of these systems that was able to take hold in a few fish because of some increased environmental stressors. And then the other thing I just want to plug is we're doing James River and Fall Line Creel survey through February 2025. So if you're fishing the James, or at a riverfront and you see one of us pestering you with questions, that's what we're doing.
And then, as always, guys, when this gets re-uploaded tomorrow, I'll put a link in the episode description to for the Virginia Department of Natural Resources, just their website with a lot more information, so you can go there and check it out. Let's see. We do have a question on Instagram. Sadly, Instagram doesn't let me show off the comments, but it's from Triple Threat Vet. Lesions, as in the Adam virus? ?
No. So these, we believe, were caused by Aeromonas and Pseudoaeromonas bacteria, which are very common in all habitats. They're, most fish can fight them off and be just fine. It's only when a fish is really stressed that, there's more chance of it actually affecting the fish. And in this, and we saw it in blue catfish as well, but it just caused like a lesion that some folks were very concerned that it was largemouth bass virus. It was not. And later in the season, as time went on and everything kind of evened out, we saw, what looked like healed lesions on the fish. So it was something that we continued monitoring to make sure it wasn't an issue. And it didn't seem to be. We had good numbers in fall. But that being said, that's another thing that we're keeping an eye on because we don't want to, be surprised by a health scare in the population. But again, having reports from the anglers was huge. I mean, I just started, getting a few of these fish in my samples. And I was like, this is something I want to look into when I heard from some anglers that were like, what's going on? And it was actually a huge help to get some fish samples to bring to them. So, yeah.
When we talk about the spotted bass, and this kind of ties into, we got another question that I'm going to add to. Victor, you just want a gift card to Jake's Bait and Tackle, please. Instagram, Facebook, or email me, fishingthedv@gmail.com. When he talks about the data, does it include spotted bass, largemouth, and smallmouth, or just largemouth? The one thing I wanted to add to that is how well do the Alabama bass, how well can they actually thrive in a brackish system like the James? And this will also be for like my Potomac guys. John, I know I've had you on the show a couple of times to talk about this issue. I also had a couple other people on that. Those episodes haven't dropped yet. Don't want to spoil that. Is it just those clear lakes like Kerr, Philpott, or can they really get a grass holds root like in the James?
I'm not too concerned about them in the Tidal James and the Chickahominy. What seems to be happening is they're holding deeper than the largemouth bass. And I think that's also why we haven't really caught more. I think they're kind of figuring out how to kind of carve up their turf. So when we're doing our fall sampling, we're seeing largemouth like up on structure where we would normally expect to find them. But every report that I've gotten from anglers, I mean, they're off, 8-10 feet of water deeper where, my cables aren't going to bring those fish up necessarily. So, it seems like they're holding deeper and, there's some kind of separation there. Where I get concerned about them is in the James above the fall line and going upstream. But in the Chickahominy and in the James tributaries, the largemouth bass population is so strong. I'm not worried about them outcompeting them and taking over. But, I'm never going to stop monitoring these guys. That's not something I want to be surprised by. I want to kind of know what's happening. So, we're always going to keep an eye on that, but I'm not super worried about them taking hold necessarily.
Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. I think, guys, just keep your questions rolling in. I think I'm on the right slide now. So James and Chickahominy. So yeah, thank you so much. That's really, really cool information. Do I go to slide 9 now? Let's see. Okay.
Yeah, you can go to the next slide. Sorry, that's a remnant from the meeting.
Okay,
so the York will be kind of short and sweet. Same thing for these guys with the adult versus juvenile and the catch per unit effort. The Mattaponi is a really hard system to get a handle on. So, when you see these like kind of lower numbers, I feel like these graphs don't really represent the Mattaponi very well. And part of that is because you see these pockets of habitat that are just overflowing with juveniles, or these pockets where you'll get just like several 3 or 4 pounders, all coming up at once. And a lot of them are up in these like no name little tributaries that are kind of, going against like incoming tide. And, we'll have like a 10-minute, 15-minute transect, and you get nothing. And then you hit this pocket of beautiful fish and a ton of juveniles. But then when you put that all together and look at the catch per unit effort for that whole transect, the numbers look really low. But when you kind of look at these different pockets, they're doing really well. And so the Mattaponi is one river where, even if I am doing a bias sample where I just want to make sure, the young a year are doing really well, the numbers just don't look that good because the habitat pockets where they are and where they're thriving are just very like kind of isolated and a little separate. So the Mattaponi is just kind of a weird system where the numbers are deceivingly low, but they're doing really well there, and you can really be surprised by pulling out some good sized fish if you know where to go.
The Virginia is blessed with a lot of tidal water rivers, and with so many, how do you survey all of them, or are there certain things and check marks that you have to hit for it to be a river that is eligible to be surveyed for black bass?
Yeah, that's a good question. So coming up with I will avoid getting into the grisly details of the algorithm that helps me pick sampling sites, but I basically use an algorithm that selects, X number of sites from the main stem and then X number of sites from tributaries based on like the size of those tributaries. And so that's how I have it stratified. And the algorithm is set up so that it doesn't select sites that are too close together. So you don't get that kind of location bias in like per year. And also so that these samples and tributaries aren't super clumped together. So you won't have two tributaries right next to each other, get all of the tributary samples for 1 year. So it's a really smart algorithm, and, setting that up was a huge game changer in making sure that we're getting a representative sample every year. And so beyond that, like I can pretty much include all of the tributaries of any size into that, and it'll have the opportunity to pull from it. That being said, I don't want to have a year where only these super tiny tributaries are getting sampled. So that's where it's stratified from like the main stem to, larger tributaries to the smaller tributaries. Beyond that, because not all tributaries are named, some of them aren't even on a map. You'll get in a river and you'll be like, what is that? That looks beautiful. I want to go sample that. And I can do that. And, that I just label as a biased sample. And so I can treat it differently when I'm messing with data. And that way I can ensure that I'm covering every habitat type. And if I think something's going on in this tributary that I've never seen before somehow, that I can still go in there and figure out what's going on.
How many
Does that
years
answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And gives me so many more. How many years do you want to have samples to really see a pattern form? Perfect world.
So perfect world. I mean, I love data so much, so I will take as many years as I can. I think, for this, especially because it took us a couple years to really transition to this new design and feel confident in it. I would want to see like 5 years in a row. So I would say 2023 was the first year where I was like, awesome, we have this dialed in. And a lot of that was because, I had all of these random samples, but I was still seeing some low numbers, and I knew that they weren't representative, and I couldn't really get at why. And so Scott actually brought up, well, what if we have this pool of, biased samples where, we're going in and we're just getting the predators to see how the predators are doing. So we kind of introduced that. So it's a bit more like a hybrid kind of sampling design, where it's like, if we're not really sure that we're getting representative samples, or we're not really sure that we're hitting what we need to hit. Weird year, like Hurricane Ian year, we didn't have those samples. And, with all the flows and the temperature drops overnight, we saw all of these adult bass put way upstream into tributaries, that weren't accessible to us. And so our samples looked really bad for adult bass. And we knew that wasn't the case, but because this hurricane had run through and, there was just this environmental variable, we couldn't access them. And so Scott had that idea. And so, you know, when we're faced with stuff like that, it gives us this flexibility to say, I think they're here, you know, because of the flows and the temperature. I'm going to go and just make sure that we're all good, you know, and it's just a way of making us feel better too. So that if we're seeing really low numbers, we can go in and make sure that, you know, that is or isn't what we're seeing. So, you know, we always want to be confident that we're capturing what's actually there. And in tidal systems, they're so dynamic that, you know, it's easy to have a hurricane move through and be like, well, did they all wash out of the system or are they just hiding upstream? So yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and I want to make sure, because I can easily get bogged down and ask 1,000 questions. We'll be here forever. Because when I talked to John about getting this thing together, we talked about, you know, collecting snakehead, and he hit about the tide. And to me, in my brain, like, that is a big variable, because at least for bass fishing, of course, it concentrates them. And John mentioned, like, well, snakehead will still go up in there, and it's like, oh, okay, so maybe that doesn't affect, you know, surveying snakehead as much as maybe, let's say, a largemouth bass if it's a super high tide versus a super low tide. It's just, there's so many things that to collect the data that you have to deal with that Mother Nature will throw at you. That's really, really cool. Let's see, go on to, I think this is the next one here, which is the York River monitoring.
Yeah. So this is kind of just the same thing, just kind of a summary of the other stuff that we're doing. I mentioned, you know, having trouble kind of finding young of year, again, just because that really patchy habitat. So we're going to go in, you know, do a lot more late summer, fall, young of year sampling, just to get a better handle on recruitment. We always have snakehead monitoring going on. We did have them confirmed in the Pamunkey in 2021. So far, we've only been able to find them consistently at one location, which is a really beautiful habitat. And anytime I sample it, it is just piled high with good sized bass. And it's the only place we find snakehead too, a ton of juvenile bass. So this is really just a hot spot in the Pamunkey. And so what we'd like to do is kind of get out and, you know, see if we're seeing any kind of, we can document, you know, snakehead spawning in some of these backwater, you know, more vegetated areas that sometimes we have a hard time getting into. And then we want to do more sampling in the Mattaponi to make sure they're not spread into there. We've done a lot of sampling already. We've never been able to catch one in the Mattaponi, but again, that's something that we're kind of always on the lookout for. And again, the disease monitoring, we didn't have anything reported in the York system, but, you know, once we kind of have that on our radar, that's something we take pretty seriously. So that'll continue for just this kind of monitoring effort for invasives and overall fish health. But that's all I got. We can move on to the Scott and the Piankatank and Rappahannock rivers. I'll stop talking my head off.
No, that was awesome. And then, as always, please get your questions in the chat. I'll try to answer the most topical ones with the slide right away. And then other questions that are more broad spectrum, we'll wait till the end, because there's a couple of good ones here, but we'll wait till the end for that. Scott, if you can hear me, you're up.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, my internet's been like flaking out like crazy the last few minutes. So I've been like kicked off like at least 3 or 4 times. Hopefully, stay on in a presentation here. So yeah, basically I'm going to cover the Piankatank, what we did, basically upper reaches of the Piankatank River, you know, lower end of Dragon Run, and then kind of continue with the Rappahannock. So we can slide on to the next page.
Alrighty, let's go right here.
Yeah, we were able to. The hopeful goal was to try to get out there and do 4 randomly selected sites. Unfortunately, wasn't able to do that. The salinity wedge was real strong again. That's what happens when you basically have no rain pretty much from mid-October to I don't know. Now, you know, tail end of October. You know, the salinity wedge always wins there on the Piankatank River. So we were able to conduct the full community sample runs. You know, looking at predator species for the most part. But we're still collecting everything that we encounter. We definitely have those limitations with our Midwest Lakes electrofishing box. We're looking at about salinity about 3.5 parts per thousand. And you can't really sample too effectively when the salinity is even higher than that in some of the other spots. So we basically had to adjust on the fly, try finding some of the other areas where we've sampled in the past. So it kind of became more of a standardized sample and run, hitting a lot of the areas that we've hit the last couple of years, pretty much the lower end of Dragon Run where the blending point. It's kind of interesting there. So next slide, please. And basically, I know this is primarily targeting and talking about largemouth bass, but everybody knows our toothy native species there, the bowfin. Pretty much the bowfin, been around for around 100+ million years, and it's basically king of the upper Piankatank and Dragon Run. We do have largemouth bass out there, so there are anglers that do catch a fair number of bass. Basically a guy with his a nice bass boat and some of a good decent selection of bass fishing lures can probably outfish us in terms of what we did last year, just because the salinity was creating so many headaches. We managed to bounce out there for 2 days of sampling, October 3rd and October 30th. Hit 7 shoreline sites. Combined effort of 2.38 hours pedal time. Allowed decent species diversity. 18 different fish species collected. I'm looking at just a total of 293 fish. So we didn't really have too much in the way of bycatch from gizzard shads and other minnow species along the line, but you do get some centrarchids in the mix, and unfortunately, we're only able to get a limited number of largemouth bass, and that only accounted for 7.5% of our total fish catch. Next slide.
So we do have a question here on Twitter, which is from Tony98. Are bowfin an endangered species?
They're not an endangered species, but they have received a fair amount of pressure over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, primarily from the bow fishermen that are actively targeting the northern snakehead. Unfortunately, some of these guys, hey, shoot first, ask questions later kind of deal. Oh, you plug a 6 or 7 pound bowfin. Guys are out there looking for a nice meal of northern snakehead fillets. They're not out there eating, the bowfin. So basically, we've seen a fair number of bowfin in our surveys, arrow wounds, it's through the body. We've seen some of those gaping arrow wounds where you're just like, whoa, somebody missed this guy or missed this female bowfin. So it's unfortunately they do get hit. People still have the right to bowfish for them. Mind you that, the creel limit for gar and bowfin, five per person, for each one of those species. And then like during the spawn though, that's actually knocked back down to like 1 per person per day. So whether or not, they're not endangered, but we do find declining numbers. We have found the declining numbers of bowfin on the Rappahannock. Piankatank's still full of them. There's piles and piles of bowfin in the Piankatank River, upper parts of Piankatank Dragon Run. A lot of them are kind of cookie cutter, 2 to 3.5 pound range. If you get a 6-7 pound bowfin out of the Dragon Run or Piankatank, that fish is definitely one of the larger specimens that are out there. We rarely see many of that size, and we've had days out there in the past where boat 300 bowfin in about an hour and a half of sampling, and probably see about two or three times as many that get away from the boat. So they're not really getting hit all that well with the electricity, especially at that higher conductivity levels.
Yeah, Jesse, you got a good question there, and I'll get to that one in a bit. That's a really good question, Jess, but I'll get to it.
Yeah, it's pretty much looking at the length frequency distribution of the bass we were able to catch last fall on the upper Piankatank, lower Dragon Run. Mind you got a couple year classes, not much to write home about. You did see limited recruitment. I think a lot of that, primarily it's not the best of systems fertility wise in terms of overall productivity. Do have a lot of bowfin out there, so if you're a little 4 to 5 inch largemouth bass, you got a lot of enemies left and right here or there that could definitely consume the smaller bass. Spawning habitat, not great by any means. You definitely do not have this shallower sandy flats, this or that. So you might have a lot of the bass that are spawning on some cypress knees or some down trees or timber, basically that any of the hardwoody substrates. So you're not really finding your typical nice sandbar here or there. Some of the tidal river systems, even in the Rappahannock, we find areas where you're surprised by some good spawning habitat in some of the tributaries. But we were only able to get one decent sized fish, about 20 inches or so. So overall, it was relatively slow fall out there, and a lot of that on the heels of that higher conductivity and the higher salinity. So it wasn't the best of surveys last year.
How much does that survey have to do with the higher salinity levels and just the lack of habitat concentration? Yeah,
a lot of it just that the draw of the just not having, not being able to shock these fish effectively. We had a couple times, Catherine Lim, she usually helps me out with a lot of my surveys, and she can net with the best of them. And when the fish are just dancing all over the place, and it's just you don't have. They're not getting shocked for 3 seconds. They're barely getting shocked for about a half a second. So people that are netting, 2 people on the bow of the boat, they have to be on their ball like you won't believe in terms of jumping on fish as fast as they can. If you get a second on a partially stunned fish, you're doing better than most in terms of netting them and putting them into the live well. So we have you've heard some decent reports of some anglers catching 2-3 pound bass here or there, but for the most part, upper Piankatank, it has shifted. There's only a lot of pound and a half. We have seen a couple 5.5 pound bass in years past. And when we did have our bass summit, it was kind of interesting. One of the anglers that was there in attendance, he brought back, hey, telling stories, not rehashing, all the stories of the glory days, but he did, chime in and tell us some good accounts from way back in the day, catching, 8-9 pound bass out of the upper Piankatank and Dragon Run. So there was better, catches of those. He was also saying it was like, 12 to 15 years ago. So mind you, the downward trend, has, limited, capacity in some of these larger fish that are there, but you actually find better bass in the 3 to 6 pound range on the Tidal Rappahannock below Port Royal than we have seen in the last couple of years on the upper Piankatank.
And I apologize, I didn't tee this up, but for people that aren't aware, does the salinity level affect your ability to shock? I probably should have teed that up for people that aren't aware of that.
Yeah, it's pretty much the biggest handcuff we have on. I'll talk a little bit just briefly later when I cover the Rappahannock stuff. Where a lot of the sites that were selected, we show up by my YSI and we're like, hey, let's see what the magic connectivity is and what the salinity is. And you're like, oh, it's like the lower end of Piscataway Creek. You're like, oh no, not 9 parts per thousand. It's like, nope, not going to happen. So then you kind of, you look at the checkoff list of the different sites that were selected. And you just, unfortunately, you're like, oh, okay, 9 parts per thousand. That's 6.5 parts per thousand. You kind of make your way further up these tributaries, and you eventually find areas where you can sample. Mind you, even at that 3 to 3.5 parts per thousand, there are a fair number of the fish that are bouncing away from you. You can find it's a little bit better on the larger size fish, but you're definitely not getting wide range of the smaller fish like spot-tailed shiners and any juvenile gizzard shad that might be in the mix that kind of just swim right through the electric field.
Awesome stuff. And then I will switch to the next slide 17.
Yeah, bouncing on to what we did last fall, looking at what all the different sampling that was conducted on the Tidal Rappahannock River. We had 7 rounds of supplemental bass stockings, several rounds of those, and that was kind of something interesting. I'll go into a little more detail about. We had the summer electrofishing, looking at collecting some more bass for our bass tagging study, as well as while we're out there in a lot of the lower end tributaries collecting fish for a Department of Environmental Quality, their fish tissue contaminant testing. So that was kind of something a little bit different this past summer. In 2022, we did a lot more tagging during the spring months, pretty much May through mid-June. So that was something we kind of shifted away from that, so we weren't shocking during the spawn on those upper end sites, just below Port Royal. But then we came back with the full community electrofishing, and in October we were out there for several days sampling. And I mentioned about the supplemental bass stock, and that was something we're going to try a little bit, just see how it goes. Unfortunately, those bigger bass that were pictured, we got them from Ice House Pond while sampling King and Queen County, right by our hatchery. Had several collections of fish from there. Those fish were moved to another lake. The club members, the King and Queen Rod and Gun Club, were generous in giving us a lot of the smaller fish, which is good. A lot of those were pretty much 8 to 15, 8 to 16 inch range, but a lot of those 5 and 5.5, 6 pounders were moved to another water. Unfortunately, not the Rappahannock, but we did find a fair number of juvenile bass that we're able to bounce to in different stocking areas that we put into the Tidal Rappahannock.
That's awesome. Let's see. Here we go.
Yeah, and here's one of the days when we were stocking. Bruce Lee, one of the pride and joy of the anglers of the Rappahannock River. They're concerned anglers, bass anglers of Virginia. He was out there helping us stock fish, Otterburn Marsh and Drake's Marsh. We were the first stockings. Put 141 largemouth bass in there. That was the early one from April 5th. Bass range in size, some juvenile ones in 3 inches up to 12 inches. Average size was not all that great, 8.5 inches. But hey, we got some juvenile fish. We did fin clips on those. And we were able to stock them within close proximity to the marsh edge for the most part. Mind you, might be a drop in the bucket, but we were able to get some surplus fish that the club members there, King and Queen, wanted removed from Ice House Pond.
How many years has that been stocked in particular, just for people that just logged in?
This was the first full-blown stocking of doing this this past year. We have used Ice House Pond and Walker Coleman Pond for other, small impoundments in and around Richmond and Henrico. a lot of that's kind of like, hey, it's like, hey, I got 150 bass, and okay, I'll bring 75 to Deep Run Park Pond, the upper pond, or in Henrico, and then stock the lower one as well. So, yeah, in terms of the Rappahannock, this was the first time we did a full-on stocking of those fish.
Cool. That's awesome. All right, here we go.
And here's just a little bit more on the sites that the other sites that we had hit. Baylor's Creek, we came in there with 131 other fish. Came back in June 16th, middle of June there in Totoski Creek, put only 93 in there. So then Mount Landing Creek, mind you, a smaller sample size there, what was stocked at 81. So different size ranges of the fish. So, some of them were pretty small. Some of the max end were hitting about 15 and a quarter, Baylor's Creek. Then 14.3 on the pretty much similar max end there at Totoski Creek and Mount Landing, but total 446 bass. So something that who knows that might contribute to year class strength here or there. But one of the things in the past that we have seen, you actually see better bass in the tidal Rappahannock in the 2 to 4 pound range. You're really not seeing year class strength, the weak year class recruitment of those pound and a quarter fish. So it's kind of one of those things where I was trying to fill in the gap, so to speak, with the supplemental stocking. Mind you, it was the 4 areas of the river that we did sample, and some of the other areas up closer to Port Royal. I'll talk about this in a little bit. We did see better recruitment up there, so there are areas in the middle reaches to the lower end that definitely needed a little assistance.
And then we have a great question here from David Smith. Again, guys, please, I got about 6 more gift cards to give away here, so ask a good question, win a prize. What section of the lower Rapp holds the best bass population? Little Falls, 301 Bridge, and so basically you kind of answered that, but just this is a topical question.
Yeah, one like Little Falls area, that's one of John Odenkirk's sites up top. You probably have better bass up there. More consistent population. There are some decent bass that sort of hang around by Port Royal. Do have a lot of hydrilla just on the flats, just down from the 301 bridge. So that kind of acts as an attractive area for bass to hang around. A little bit on the edge of the break line, mind you. When you have low tide, a lot of that hydrilla is basically foot and a half of water. Great for snakeheads, and the snakehead anglers love hitting that area pretty hard. Tappahannock gets a little too salty down there, so mind you that there are anglers that do fairly well in Piscataway Creek, so that you get, some 5, 6, 7 pound bass out of Piscataway Creek. But those fish are kind of playing the surfing game with the saltwater wedge slipping in and out. And, so you do have a lot of network interconnecting channels further up in Piscataway Creek. But ideally, Tappahannock, there's a reason why they have the Croaker tournament out of there pretty much mid-May, the big Croaker tournament, because it starts getting a little higher salinity levels, come May to June. So I would basically race to Little Falls. Hopefully that answers your question to some extent.
I never knew there was a Croaker tournament. Okay, yeah. Anyone in the chat, message me with details on that. That blew my mind there. We got a couple more questions rolling in now, so we'll go on to the next slide.
Yeah, basically, covering quickly what we did in June. We were out there for 4 days, sampling, June 9th, 16th, 23rd, and 30th in conjunction with the bass stockings. Lower end trips, we kind of concentrated further on downriver because we had tagged a lot of our other fish the year before. The northern tributaries, pretty much above Drake's Marsh and the main channel site. So it was like, well, let me try sampling some of these lower sites further down in the river system. And actually, those were the sites that were on the list for DEQ for the collections for their fish. So gave them a representative sample of the different species they wanted. Mind you, I tagged my bass and I let the bass go, and DEQ did not get any largemouth bass, thrown into their ice coolers, but they did get, bowfin snakeheads. It broke my heart, throwing some long-nosed gar into, from a Totoski Creek into the coolers there, but that's how it goes. And mixed bag of other species, yellow perch crappie. So, what the results are not out yet on a lot of the fish tissue testing. Hopefully we can get something maybe early June to July or something this summer when it comes to those fish that we did send them. So I know John and some of the guys out of the Fredericksburg office, I think we're collecting fish further up high for them as well.
Sweet. Awesome stuff. Let me get the next slide here, and boop. There we go.
Yeah, just touching real quickly about the tagging study. We had conducted some more surveys in June there in October. Basically, those were on the heels of the fish that we had tagged in 2022. Looking at those lower end sites, tag returns in 2023 definitely showed a decline from 2022. How much of that was natural mortality of some of these fish? You do have some tag loss here or there. The T-bar anchor tags, the floy tags that we inject, basically just below the dorsal fin on the left side of the fish's body, they'll have an individual tag number. So we know if anybody, Margie had talked earlier about all the tag bass on the Chickahominy. So basically, we're looking at the premise of this project, the tagging study, to see if anybody was coming down from Hicks Landings, allowing a fairly decent tournament circuit out of Hicks Landing. You do have some little tournaments out of a couple of other ramps to see if any of these fish are being moved further upriver, whether or not they would ever make their way further back down, fighting the salinity wedge that creeps their way up, where you do have some salinity that pushes up to Port Royal. It's minimal there, but the lower ends of, Carter's Wharf does get to about 3.5, 4 parts per thousand during the middle summer. During the fall, it gets a tad bit higher. So whether or not, these fish definitely, the ones that we saw in tag returns, some of them are, getting caught during pre-fishing. There are a few getting caught at a couple of their tournaments. They're not necessarily the biggest fish in the world. We had a couple 5, 5.5, and 6 pounders. Most of the bass that we have tagged in the past, you get these cookie cutter 2 to 2.5 pound fish. So somebody catches it, happy to catch it. Not necessarily going to be in their winning creel for their limit. Hey, I had it in my bag and then I culled it. Catching in the pretty much same spot where a lot of these fish have been caught. We did have a couple bass that were caught about 3 miles up from Hicks Landing. So whether or not that fish, went for a boat ride, get to go for a shiny bass boat ride further upriver, who knows? But I don't think these fish are naturally moving by their own means to any extent. But we definitely do have seen fish move out of their creeks, like Jets Creek. A lot of the tag bass in Jets Creek, they've scooted out of there. So they're in there thick during the spring. April, May, June, things get a little warm, a little stagnant for the most part. They scoot on out, and we definitely don't see them. So it's kind of like, it's always nice to see recaptures in any of our surveys, so you can kind of look back, see how fast those fish are growing. You say, hey, it's a year, 2 years later, so you kind of get an idea. And actually, I just got an email today. One angler actually caught two tag bass out of Jets Creek, so it's kind of interesting. I got to look at my file to see, hey, when those fish were actually tagged and what their initial size was. But one was I think like 4.3 pounds, so that one's doing a lot better than most that we actually shocked out of the Jets. So it's one of the things we're doing with the tagging study, looking at the different zones of the study, the upper tribs, the main stem areas, and using Drake's Marsh pretty much as a cutoff point. And you get those lower tribs. And that was kind of the tricky part, finding enough bass to fulfill our tagging needs on the lower end. And, you can shock to them blue in the face kind of deal. And some of these other tribs are just not producing as much down low in and around Rappahannock. So.
Let's go to the next slide here.
Yeah, covering the different sites we hit in the fall electrofishing. We were out there for 5 days, October 4th, 5th, 11th, 12th, and the 19th. Combined effort of hitting those 23 sites, pretty much ranging from Port Royal all the way down to our furthest end, the upper reaches of the Toski Creek. Total effort looking at 6.38 hours. So we were bouncing around, hitting a bunch of different sites. Unfortunately, some of the other ones on the lower end were not conducted. Some of those were pretty much mouth of Cap Point Creek. Even some of the lower end sites in Cap Point Creek were a little bit on the salty side. So we managed to push up a little bit further and managed to still get on some fish. Mennekin Bay up high in Cap Point Creek, but salinity wedge was definitely a problem last fall.
So we have a really good question here from Gary's Fish Tales. Since it's brackish and tidal, do you ever get saltwater species like flounder? Here in Florida, I usually catch redfish and flounder during the bass tournament.
Yeah, we definitely do see some saltwater species that creep their way up. Be perfectly honest with you, we were out last week sampling Piankatank River, trying to get a few more striped bass for our hatchery. Mind you, our striper collection was not great by any means, but I was happy as can be, and we got 3 puppy drum. And I was like, hey, so it's kind of interesting. April, fish are moving up. Mind you, the puppy drum were 15 to 16 inch range, but last fall I didn't see a single puppy drum at all. A lot of the sites we hit. So, they're one of my favorite species, seeing those guys and those juvenile red drum. So it's kind of interesting. The one had 6 spots. So I was really excited seeing the little puppy drum. You do see occasional flounder here or there that slipped their way up. Piankatank River, we have collected, 4.5, 5 pound speckled trout. Mind you that they're rare where we're sampling, pretty much just below drag and run. But they're definitely you do find a few saltwater fish that make things a little bit interesting on that end. So, well, like today we were on the James River sampling and looking for more striped bass, and got into giant schools of striped mullet. So it's kind of interesting where the fall surveys, you striped mullet, they'll make their way up. They'll go all the way up to the barge pits on the James River. But we're sampling Flower Dew 100 point, and you're just, I don't know, about 15, 20, a striped mullet, all about 2.5, 3 pounds. I'll start bouncing. I was like, well, weren't striped bass, but striped mullet, so who knows? But that's something different on that end. But it's kind of fun when we do see some of the saltwater fish to get that blending in the brackish water.
All right, we got, let's see, I think the next one here is cruising the hydrilla.
Yeah, this is just a quick idea showing some of the sites that we're hitting. So I think this was in Jets Creek, where you find that hydrilla edge, and definitely if you have a tide creeping out and you're approaching lower tide, you basically cruising along there, shocking. You find a lot of fish just targeted along that edge. So just in there, not too much behind that, just besides the seeing that. You do find some good cover in these creeks, especially as closer you get to Port Royal. Finding that hydrilla, great for juvenile bass, just in that whole nursery habitat that's there. Ginkatee Creek, just to the west, basically the most northern arm, creek arm just below Port Royal. That's got some great hydrilla in there, and it's been one of our more productive areas for finding juvenile bass. So it's always great to see those young fish, whether or not they make it, 2, 3, 4 more years down the line. That's a whole nother story, and hopefully we'll be tracking them in the future. Next slide. I was talked earlier about the higher salinities there in Piscataway Creek. So instead of just putting a big fat asterisk on our data sheet with the salinity levels, we did record them. We pushed her further up the creek to see, hey, we find some bass up high, some bowfin, occasional snakehead here or there. So it's kind of interesting actually hitting some of these areas, specifically Piscataway Creek and actually Mount Landing Creek, where basically is as far as you can go up to the creek. And in Piscataway, we found a giant pine tree that pretty much blocked the boat. And, it's like, hey, maybe you have a kayak, you can slip over that pine tree, but not making it any further. So you definitely had to ad-lib some of our upper end sites. We actually did a full community on this site too. So we did find a fair number of bait fish and, centrarchids, mixed bag of pumpkin seeds and some bluegill. So you do find different fish assemblage in these upper ends of these creeks. And then you get the full community electrofishing surveys, gave a tally of 1,408 fish. So had great species diversity. So it's kind of interesting seeing the 36 different species that we were able to collect. We had 197 largemouth bass, and unfortunately the CPU of that, with the amount of effort we had, 31 bass per hour. Catch rate, takes into account a lot of the poor results from those lower sites. So you can't always necessarily, if you go to a lake, you can't always sample all the beaver huts, all the lily pads. So you do have those other sites that are worked into our collection. And on the lower end, that definitely did take away from our full tally. If I'm not going to take away those sites and just to bump up my CPU, the catch rate there, but so you're looking at the bass collection comprised, 14% of all the total fish we collected, over those 5 days we were out in the Rappahannock. And here's just the length frequency distribution of the bass we collected. Good recruitment coming through. That 2023 year class, boom. A lot of those guys, that 3 to 7 inch range, bulk of them in that 5 to 6 inch range. So you do have a lot of good fish piling on through. The catch rate, not great, just shy of 31, fish per hour. Preferred bass, unfortunately, was low. You got like 2.8 preferred bass per hour. That's pretty much a 15-inch bass or larger. We like to use that as an index in terms of assessing the population. But the young, you're looking at just shy of 23 fish per hour. The PSD's hanging tight. Mind you, that PSD just reflects, that proportion of the fish, the population that's, greater than 8 inches and out of the 12-inch fish. But so it's basically one of those things where we like to see some better year classes filing through. Hopefully that 23 year class continues to stay with us and push their way down the line. Definitely did not see, I'd mentioned, those 10 to 12 inch fish. You don't see too many of them in that size. And that was kind of one of the things where, we stocked those fish. And mind you that the areas that we did have overlap in the areas that we had stocked fish, I did not necessarily see any of my partially fin clip fish. So that's not to say that they all perished, a couple of days later, but I like to think that some of those fish are still alive, and, you can be able to, check on them in the future. Basically that partial fin clip on the left pelvic fin that actually will regrow. You'll actually see a little wavy line on that regrowth of that, that fin margin. So you can kind of look at it, in the years down the line, hopefully you find some of those ones that we stocked. Not really looking at, tapping the Ice House Pond anymore, pretty much because they pretty much drain that whole lake. So, but if we do find any other sources of possible other bass, who knows, but not necessarily in the works for this year. And I think I got, the one more slide here showing 2022 distribution. I can bounce back to that one. That's pretty much just a comparison of what we saw the year before. Had a piles of those juvenile fish, 4 to 7 inch range. Had a couple pushing into 8 inch range, most likely juvenile fish in October survey. So you do have some that, I didn't take odorless on any largemouth bass the last couple of years. That's something that, when you see as limited number of bass as we have been seeing in the lower areas, you kind of feel a little bit guilty. But, as in years past when we saw some better numbers of fish, you can kind of get a, representative sample of the age structure, how the bass are doing. But for the most part, you did see that big slug of those juvenile fish again. And you get a couple larger fish in the mix, the 17 to 20 inch range, but definitely did not see the, 5, 6 or 7 pounders. So it's, definitely in our fall surveys. We did see them in our 2022 spring tagging. I didn't display that, but we did see some better fish in the spring survey. So, and I get one more slide, and that just shows you kind of the breakdown of where the areas we sampled. Mind you, green means fair to good, and red means you can guess what pretty much red means. Low numbers of fish on a lot of those lower end sites. PD Creek, disappointed. You do have a lot of, some of the other ones, Upper Hoskins Creek and all that. So definitely more of those lower end sites. We're tailing off and just sad numbers there. We did do a lot better towards the tail end of October, the mouth of Mill Creek. We found a lot of nice bass there. So a lot of good hydrilla still hanging on towards the, middle October when we were sampling. So a lot of juvenile fish, and definitely had a high percentage of those juveniles, looking at 74%. So big slug of this juvenile fish making up a strong year class that hopefully will translate to, hopefully some better survival rate down the line, and hopefully anglers can be catching them later on. So, I think that's then we can transition to Odenkirk, and he's got a little bit better results further upriver.
I get the fun spot because
strong.
Well, yeah. So we've been talking a lot about variable recruitment, year class strength. These basically the same thing. It's just a fancy way of describing spawning success, because that, in any fishery, that's what's driving it mostly. Okay. You got 3 things exerting any influence on whatever population you're talking about, fish or whatever, right? Recruitment, the number coming in, the growth, and mortality, how many are going out. If you know those 3 things, you can unlock any secret you want and describe what's going on, right? And that's what we're trying to do, is figure out what's going on. And to me, and to most biologists working with fisheries, recruitment is such a key thing. In a lot of cases, recruitment's fine. It's not an issue. A reservoir is a pretty cushy place to make a living, especially a stable reservoir like Lake Anna or a Lake Orange or whatever. But when you get down a river system, everything changes. And then you throw tidal mechanisms into a riverine system, and then it's even more complicated. So you have all these different factors exerting influences on the spawning success of your favorite species. And so it's not quite as simple as just saying, well, when the flows are average, we're going to have a good smallmouth spawn. That was easy. But when we get into snakeheads or tidal largemouth bass populations, we still don't know completely the drivers. I mean, we know it's related to aquatic vegetation, and aquatic vegetation is related to flow, nutrients, precipitation and light transparency. There's all these different variables that come into play. Well, in the tidal Rappahannock, we had a situation starting about 1998, and then it kind of culminated in 2003 with a lot of really, really angry bass anglers. And Bruce Lee was among the kind of the top tier. It was come to our attention and said, look, man, the Rappahannock's really screwed up. Y'all need to stock fish now. And we hadn't been looking at the tidal Rappahannock. You know, we maybe had 1 or 2 surveys over the last 5 or 8 years or something like that. And we said, wow, well, apparently we need to get out there and figure out what the hell's going on. And so we started surveying the tidal Rappahannock, and that was below Fredericksburg. Basically, the fall line for the Rappahannock is Fredericksburg. And then Mike Ozel's the other biologist I work with, and Robbie Willis. And we go down to Port Royal. That's the end of Region 4, which is the region where I work in. And then you switch over to Scott and Margie. So our area of responsibility went to Port Royal. And at that time, there were other biologists working in Region 1, which is Scott and Margie. And so we set up what we called go ahead and change the slide for me, Thomas, please.
Yeah.
So we set up a sampling regime in 2003. I said 2004, I think. So it was 2003. And what had happened was there were a series of essentially catastrophic events culminating in complete failures of like 4 out of 5 consecutive year classes. So like, you know, if we have a 1 bad year class, Mother Nature, you know, lays an egg 1 year, that's not a big deal because you've got buffer on either side of that. When you have 4 out of 5 that are failures, then like 3 or 4 years down the road, when all those fish should be in the bags, they're not there because they never were. And that was when the problem came up. Now, if you think about it too, when you think about a tidal system and that variability and all those different things driving it, the further you go down, right, towards the salinity wedge, where it's more of a frequent occurrence, that's when things are going to get even sketchier. So when you look at something like freshwater aquatic vegetation, whether it's hydrilla or something native or whatever, they both have the same functional values, and they work to protect nursery areas and spawning refuge and things like that. And so when you have that destroyed, as we did, the further we went down the tidal freshwater Rappahannock, it was just awful, you know, down in Scotty's area. And so, you know, I think Bruce Lee will be one of the first to admit that for many years, you know, the bass fishery wasn't all that terrible. Well, it was kind of terrible. and what I call the upper tidal Rappahannock versus what Scott just talked to you about, the lower tidal Rappahannock. So anyway, what we did in 2003 was we set up 6 sites. We basically looked and we had like 20 odd miles of river in our work area. And we said, okay, we didn't do this in the spring because we had no more spare time in the spring. So we said the fall is the second best window to get a non-biased size structure and hopefully abundance estimates on largemouth bass in the tidal system. So we said, okay, we're going to do fall sampling, and we're going to do it we said 6 stations every 3 miles. And so these are our 6 stations. And somebody asked a question a while back about, well, where are the best spots? Well, the way things have been going on the Rappahannock, the best spots are pretty much anywhere you want to fish in this group of 6 areas. And when we do our survey, we're generally within about a river mile up or downstream of these areas. We just shot 1,200 seconds along the shoreline. And that's our 1 hour of pedal time. You know, it takes us several hours of work to get that 1 hour of pedal time. But that's what you keep hearing, this metric of fish per hour. That is a key metric, not only for us, but nationwide, worldwide. That is a metric to evaluate what we call relative abundance. How many fish are out there? And we've tied relative abundance to true abundance. We know it's a reflection most times, if we're doing our job right, of what's really out there. And so that's the idea. If we're not figuring out a snapshot of what's real, then what the hell are we doing, right? So hopefully we're checking the boxes and we're doing it, and we can judge trends. And so there's different, you know, Margie touched on the differences between pure random sampling versus this, which is a stratified random sampling. So this is sort of a composite between a fixed site. Again, we depending on what the tide gives us, we may not be in the exact same reach we were, you know, last year. But anyway, that's another conversation for a different day. If I was going to fish any of these, I'd fish Hop Yard or Hicks. They're absolute dynamite right now. Hicks probably because there's a lot of weigh-in fish released there, but Hop Yard is phenomenal. And for years, we didn't see a lot of submerged aquatic vegetation, SAV, anywhere on the main stem Rappahannock. And it was a head scratcher. You look, because fragments were constantly coming down from upriver. And that's when you get into this thing, well, these rivers are all different. They're regional drivers. So typically, if you have a good year class for smallmouth on the James, you're going to have a good year class for smallmouth on the Rappahannock. And if you have a good year class for largemouth bass on the tidal James, you're going to have a good, you know, it goes like that. But not always, because these systems are dramatically different. The productivities are different. the drainages are different. You know, and that gets into nutrients and zooplankton and what's happening when the fish are coming up, you know, and so you just can't make, you know, blanket assertions, but it's nice when you do see regional trends. It gives you some credence that things are occurring, at least in what you think they should be occurring. So, okay, next slide, please.
One question that I have just to bore the audience listening right now is we have talked about on the show, and I probably talked to you about this ad nauseum with SAV. I had somebody ask me a question 2 weeks ago that was very simple and honest, which is like, why can't we just plant SAV if it's a problem? And it was a very interesting thought experiment. Like, what is that issue with that habitat? Is it just water quality that will make it disappear? Is it something that you can't plant, correct?
Now, planting SAV in a tidal system it'd be next to impossible, and just a tremendous logistical hurdle. I mean, people have a hard time establishing water willow in Carr Reservoir. You know, a very stable environment, a plant, you go along the shoreline, you can fence it out. There's just, it's an overwhelming, not to say it hasn't been tried, and it has been tried. And in some cases, there's been some success, but, you know, essentially we're at the mercy of Mother Nature in a lot of these situations. And we're going to take what she's going to give us. And if that means 5 years of hurricanes and droughts, then that's what we're going to get. And there's not a lot we can do to mitigate that. But as we're going to see here very shortly, Mother Nature is very good at mitigating. When she throws us a turd, a lot of times she'll polish that turd down the road. So
bumper sticker. There you go. Here we go.
So here we go. And what I think is a really extraordinary scenario. These are the averages from the 6 sites I just showed you. And you really can't make up more compelling data. We were starting at ground zero in 2003. I mean, anglers were right. There were no fish out there because, you know, they weren't there to begin with. And so we're starting from nothing. And, you know, this was not a result of stocking, although stocking did work in the Chickahominy. It probably would have been almost as good without stocking, but, you know, what the hell, we get some extra fish from stocking too. And as we're finding out in different scenarios, you know, supplemental stocking, there may be a management action for that that's cost effective and should proceed. But in this case, this is all wild fish. Again, Mother Nature sort of picking up the slack and giving us some good year classes. And it kind of took a while for it to take off, but it really took off. So our catch rate this year, if you see that high point way up on the top, 2000 and it was past year, I should say 2023, because we sampled in the fall, that represents 94 total bass per hour. And that's astonishing. As you can see, that's the highest we've ever seen in the tidal Rappahannock. It blew away the Potomac, our creeks in the Potomac last year. Not quite double, but I mean, it was for a lot of years, the Rappahannock couldn't come close to beating the tidal Potomac Virginia side. And as you can see, it just crushed it. And a lot of that is because of these very good year classes that we've had. Next slide, please. And I think that these good year classes we're seeing is a direct result of all the aquatic vegetation that we've seen in the last 3 to 4 years that we have not seen for almost 20 years in the Rappahannock system. And at the last, Scott showed you the graph with the really good recruitment that he saw in his section of the river, a little below this. So it's really nice that at a regional level, things have been calm enough since 2018, the wettest year in recorded history, that we've had excellent spawns. So that I think the past 5 years, we've had the 5 highest catch rates overall. And now the last 7 years, we've had 5 of the highest young of year or juvenile. They're not young of year, they're juveniles because we'll collect them basically. No, I'm sorry. I'm thinking the Potomac. Potomac fish are 1 year out. These are technically young of year fish. So we're just evaluating the juvenile index differently because one's fall collected, one's spring collected. So, but yeah, if you look at the graph of the reproduction and the graph of the total abundance, it makes sense. We're having great year classes and our adult, the overall population is increasing. So now is a great time to go fishing in the tidal Rappahannock. I put in at Hop Yard and I fish upstream about a half mile and I fish down to Hicks. Fantastic. Fish the wood, fish the creek mouths on outgoing tide. Fish the spatter dock, fish the hydrilla, and you'll catch all the snakeheads and bowfin and largemouth bass you can want. I mean, you get the slam. Shout out to Jonathan Levitt, got the slam. And I don't know if they were consecutive casts, but he caught the bowfin, the snakehead, and the largemouth within a very short period of time. So good for him. Jim Johnson, I'm putting you out there on notice that you're going to have to top that. So there's that's I think that's my last slide, isn't it?
So yes, it is. And
Yeah.
we
So it's just a phenomenal fishery on the Rappahannock right now, and just glad to watch it unfold. Really.
We got a bunch of questions now that I've been holding off that were kind of not just specific to one slide. So I'm gonna just start letting you guys have it, and whoever wants to come off mute and answer it, you can go for it here. So let's. I think this one is going to be probably for you, John. But how likely? This is from Bluegrass, I think. Bluebird. I'm not gonna be able to say your name, boss. Apologies. You know who you are. How likely are you to catch a smallmouth south of the Little Falls boat ramp?
Yep. So we see, again, we catch, I said our catch rate was 94 an hour. Okay. So that means we're 6 sites. We're looking at 500 to 600 largemouth bass in a typical fall sample in the week we spend on the tidal wrap. We might see 5 or 6 smallmouth. I mean, so, a couple orders of magnitude lower in abundance. And typically they're not really big fish. Up around Little Falls, where those rocks are just upstream from that boat landing, I think is some of the better smallmouth habitat. And there's an individual who has been very successful there catching citation smallmouth for years. And I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen the pictures and talked to him. But there are some big smallmouth in the upper section of that river, like right around just above Little Falls boat landing. That first bend up there, I think, is, from what I've seen on habitat, is the best area. But they're there. We don't see them in our samples, but again, we're sampling is not, we're biased against a fish like smallmouth that time of year that's going to be in deeper water.
All right, we got another.
Downriver, we see a couple juvenile smallmouth. I think last year we saw about 3. They were, 6 to 9 inch range. You look at them, you're like, hey, what are you doing down here? You're a little confused. Go back to, further upriver. And it's like, who knows? But, hang out in Fredericksburg. But, we do find a few, but we have not seen any 13 to 16 inch smallmouth. It'd be nice to see them, but they definitely you just don't have the habitat down low for them.
How much of it though? How much will the salinity change affect them? And I'm thinking, like, if you have a tournament out of Leesylvania or Smallwood State Park on the Potomac and you haul up to DC and bring one back, I mean, is that fish pretty much, KIA, or would it be able to survive down that far?
Oh, yeah, it should be all right.
All right, we got the next one. Let's see. Okay, this is a fun topic. I haven't talked about it all.
That's in that one. I'm muting.
High and muddy fishing. Do you think the blue cats are going to affect these areas? So, anyone want to talk about the blue catfish?
So I work a lot with blue cats, so I can kind of talk large scale about what our data is showing. So we've seen blue cats be on the decline for the past several years. A lot of that is because we've seen recreational effort go up. We've seen commercial effort go up, and that's kind of helping keep that population in check. In the context of the blue catfish population explosion and then subsequential decrease, bass populations have gone up and down, and the James and Chickahominy bass fisheries are still banging. So it's not blue cats aren't going to come up and target largemouth bass. They target stuff that's really easy. They're omnivores, so they're eating a lot of algae. They're eating a lot of invasive snails and mussels, actually, which is cool. But they do eat a lot of our native fish too. But they don't seem to really focus in on largemouth bass, and I think a lot of that has to do with the big fish that could take down like a good sized bass. Tend to hang out lower usually, and they just don't seem to move around that much. So there is going to be some habitat overlap, and I'm sure there's some predation happening, but it doesn't seem to be at a level where it's affecting like bass populations.
Do they affect striper at all when it comes to, and because I've gotten this before with the striped bass issues that we're facing in the Chesapeake Bay, is there any kind of competition there?
Yeah, so I mean, I think they're eating a lot of stuff, right? They are opportunistic omnivores, so they're eating what is easy to get. So they've done diet studies, and we know that they've found stripers, they found alosines, they've found blue crab, they found sturgeon eggs in their stomachs. It seems to. So I'm actually doing a movement study in the James and the Chickahominy River, showing kind of how they move, and we're trying to like line that up with some of the diet work that's been done. And what seems to be happening is they kind of cluster out into these kind of community units where they seem to be focused around or like specialized in certain food sources. So not all blue catfish will move downstream and eat blue crab. Not all blue catfish will follow Olocene runs up to the fall line, but some of them do. So we know that they're eating those native species and commercially important species. We know that it has been impacting them, but that's why, you know, our management goal, and we work with recreational anglers and we work with commercial watermen, is to get that overall biomass down. So it reduces that impact, but it also maintains the trophy fishery that is really important fishery for Virginia. So we're really trying to walk that line and make sure that, you know, we're decreasing this impact as much as we possibly can, because they're not going away. It wouldn't be possible to remove them if we wanted to, right? But we do want to reduce that impact as much as we can while still maintaining that trophy fishery. And that kind of allows us to have the best of both worlds, right? Where we get that trophy fishery, and in order to maintain that, you know, you have to have less competition among blue catfish. So that kind of works out to reduce that predation on our native and commercially important fish.
And as always, guys, this is an ongoing drama. And as this goes into season 5, the whole blue catfish thing, we will kind of keep you up to date with that. We got Brandon Howe. You just want a gift card to Jake's Bait and Tackle. With kayak fishing gaining popularity and the use of CPR, is that a possible data point? Could that be a benefit of more boat tournaments going CPR? No weights, but length and things like lessons. Thoughts on anything? Anyone would like to take it? You're more than welcome to.
I mean, I'm always for, you know, people being able to access the resource. So, I mean, you know, when I see different ways of, you know, people getting out on the river, I'm for it. I think it's awesome. For me, I love talking to anglers. I love like getting that information. I love hearing from people saying like, I caught this fish here. I think I saw this here. I think I caught a snakehead. You know, that just helps me know what's going on, you know, on the ground. You know, as many hours as we all spend on the river, it's not as many hours as all of, you know, Virginia anglers all together. So I say more eyes on the water and more communication, the better. But I don't know if anybody else has comments.
Yeah, with the CPR, it's definitely interesting, like, you know, to see what people are catching, whether, you know, the tournaments, Major League Fishing, hey, you know, you're not taking pictures of the fish, but they're weighing the fish in the boat, you know, quick release. So you can kind of definitely, that aspect of tournament angling is definitely interesting in terms of not putting, you know, stress on a fish in terms of, hey, bouncing around for 7-8 hours and, you know, taking it, you know, 55 miles away from where you caught it. So, yeah, the kayak anglers, they're definitely hitting the Rappahannock River pretty hard in terms of, you know, a lot of recreational. There are, you know, the kayak, you know, snakehead tournaments that are popping up. So a lot of these guys, you know, finding the little nooks and crannies where the snakehead are still present in a lot of the tributaries and, you know, some of the grass beds on the Rappahannock. There are other areas that do get worked over by bow fishermen. You know, I won't necessarily throw them under the bus too hard, but, you know, there's certain areas that we shock, and you shock for an hour in a certain creek and you see 2 snakeheads. So you're just like, well, I guess the bow fishermen have, you know, come into this creek and worked them over hard. But it's not to say that these creeks are, you know, totally vacant of a snakehead population, but, you know, it's kind of one of those things where the kayak anglers that are out there definitely can find those little backwater sloughs and areas that, you know, the larger boats might not be able to, you know, sneak into. So it's kind of interesting. You know, when you do talk to some of the kayak fishermen, and Wilmot Landing a couple years ago, we were talking to one angler, and he was like, hey, and talking about all the snakeheads he catches here and there. So, you know, he was also eating a bunch of them, but enjoying the resource in the process too. So it's kind of fun to, you know, talking to these fishermen.
Awesome. We got a couple more questions here. Make sure, guys, if you get your questions in, because we're not going to be going that much longer. We got Gage, in their opinion, what are some of the best ways you can keep the stress levels of caught fish, especially early in a tournament environment, to best help the catch and release process after a weigh-in?
I take that one. I just read a paper, Thomas, about live well additives, and the result of that paper I can share with you if you'd like to see it at some point. You can share it with whoever else. They're basically a waste of time and money. The bottom line is if you want to keep your fish healthy, use recycle your water constantly. Fresh water in, old water out. And then don't fish when it's hot. Fish, the stress that fish experience is directly proportional to water temperature, which is inversely proportional to oxygen capacity. So just self-limit. I mean, people always ask us, why don't you ban tournaments, in August or when the water's like, 80 to 90 degrees or more? We don't want to have to do that. People should be smart enough to regulate themselves and not stress fish in the times when they're going to be stressed most. So just cycle fresh water and fish when the water's not too hot.
At what temperature do bass, is there a threshold? Is it 80 degrees, 60, 100? Is there like a range where it's like, this is a little too much?
Largemouth are a warm water fish. So, they'll tolerate better temperatures than smallmouth, which are considered a cool water fish. I'd start to get queasy about carrying bass around in the tank when it gets up into the 80s, especially you get past the mid 80s, definitely. But anything up into the 80s, I'd start to be pretty cautious about.
Awesome stuff. And yes, I would love to look at that paper.
Yeah, I'll make a note and send you that.
And break it down. Let's see. We got Joshua. Joshua, you just won a gift card to Jake's Bait and Tackle. Please message me on Facebook, Instagram, or email me, fishingthedmv@gmail.com. What bodies of water do you guys stock the F1s? And how long does it take for those to take off with population growth?
I got a little background perspective on that. We have a largemouth bass stocking policy that a guy named Vic DeCenzo wrote about a long time ago, before he left to go back to get his PhD. And then anyway, bottom line was we decided a while ago that whenever we needed to do any largemouth bass stocking, we were going to use F1s because in most of Virginia, largemouth bass aren't native. And what we've got now are a bunch of mutts. In other words, the percentage of Florida alleles in the population varies from 20 to 30% up to 80% in most cases. Most cases it's in that range. So we've got a bunch of what we call FXs. They're mutts. They're back crosses. They're not northerns. They're not Floridas. They're just mutts. And so there's some data that show that the original back cross, the F1, the first generation of a pure northern and a pure Florida can provide some incentive for enhanced growth, maybe bigger top end. And then once they breed with whatever else of FX is in the population, then they're FX. Everybody washes back out. Mm-hmm. So we decided that it was our policy as the agency was going to be if we needed to stock anything, whether it was to remediate a fish kill, whether it was a new reservoir, which isn't very common anymore, or for whatever reason, we were going to stock F1s. And we generally have proceeded along that path over changes in administration and changes in leadership. And it was also for a long time, it was deemed irresponsible almost to remedially stock black bass because most of the literature out there showed that was abject failure. The Chickahominy changed a lot of that. We pushed back against the Chickahominy stocking for years because we didn't think it was a wise investment. And like we said, we work for the anglers and we don't want to waste the anglers' money because right now they're the one paying us. But, we were kind of forced to stock the chick because they gave us money to buy fish. How do you say no to that, right? And so we stocked F1s and the chick, and it might have been the most successful remedial stocking, at least in the published literature to this date. We've tried to replicate that in other cases, and it didn't work. So it works sometimes and not in others. So what we're doing now primarily is we're looking at 5 different large reservoirs in the state to see if this enhanced stocking can result in a top end. What we're trying to do is see if we can get the bags at Anna, going from routinely now in the low to mid 20s. Can we get those pushing 30 pounds and over maybe in another 5 or 6 years? So this is something to watch and see. And it may have implications for other management in other waters. But we're working on it to see if it's something that might be, doable.
I know this is anecdotal, but last week I just interviewed the Shenandoah Division BFL winner on Smith, and I looked back at the BFL stats. It took usually 17 to 18 pounds about 10 years ago to win. The last 4 events over the last couple of years have taken 27 pounds. It's a hell of a jump in weight.
And that's Dan Wilson is the biologist that's down there managing that fishery. And he's the one that got pushed into the corner, just like the chick when the Smith Mountain Lake people wanted us to stock. And Dan said, no, man, it's not a good use of money. We've already got all these natural fish. And they handed him a check. And okay. So we know now we have genetic markers on those fish. We know for sure, because that's the thing, to evaluate any stocking program, you have to know with utmost certainty, is that a stocked fish or is it a wild fish? Well, in the old days, we used to have to do all kinds of wacky stuff, which we don't have to do anymore because technology. And so we just take a fin clip, send it to a lab, pay like $20 or whatever a sample, and they tell us, yeah, that was one of the F1s you stocked 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever. So that's really nice to be able to have that. And Smith Mountain started way before any of these other reservoirs. Scotty's got a couple of them. I got one, Lake Anna. And so because Lieutenant Dan Wilson got a jump on this thing, what he's seeing now is probably not, we don't know for sure yet, but it's likely that is maybe the F1 contribution to those bigger bags. And it's definitely not happened at Anna yet, but it probably is a Smith Mountain.
When would you know? Just to confirm that. Well, we could do Anna, but Anna and Smith.
Well, the genetic contract's a huge pain in the butt, and Dan's been waiting for samples for almost a year, and we're still trying to get them back from the lab. So, yeah, we should know. Dan should know relatively soon. I hope.
I think people need to know that because to appreciate it. Like all this stuff takes time, and when people get impatient online or in forums. I mean, just the fact that it would take a year just to get the information back from the lab. I mean, there's so many things that you have to almost hurry up and wait. And I think people listening need to understand the context of that. It's so important. Let's see. We got 4 more questions left, and then we'll kind of wrap up. Jesse Kurt, what can rec anglers do to improve largemouth bass fishing in these tidal rivers? Scott, you got anything? You look quiet there.
Yeah, pretty much echoing what John said about limiting tournaments during the hot summer months. Remind you that the tidal rivers might not get as toasty as Lake Chesdin a couple years ago when we were getting 93 degree surface temperature water, but you're still getting those 85 to 88 degree range, middle of July, August. So, not like most of these rivers don't have night tournaments. I know Chickahominy Lake, they definitely have a few tournaments there out of Ed Allen's. Hey, night tournaments. I'm like, well, maybe the water temperature cools down a little bit, might alleviate some of the stress on those bass that are caught, but definitely, limiting your amount of fishing during those hot weather periods. It's kind of one of those things where, hey, you still got the itch to go fishing during the summer months. Maybe you get out there for, 2 or 3 hours, 6 o'clock to 8:30 or so and catch a few bass. But when it's cranking, 100-degree day and you're catching fish, you definitely don't want to hold on to them too much. Always try to practice as best proper handling of the fish, wet hands, limit the amount of time that bass is spent, in the air. So, high and dry, so to speak, try not to boat flip them. Everybody like, hey, boat flipping, 2, 3, 4 pounders into the boat as it bouncing around on the carpet, this and that. But if at all possible, to try to limit that amount of stress on those fish. And, it's kind of one of those things where we're not preaching, don't fish during the spring months during the spawn. I know people do catch some nice bass during the spawn and maybe not necessarily seeing those bedding bass on any of the turbid waters, the Rappahannock, this and that. But you still have good recruitment, even though when people are fishing during those the spring months. But you catch a 6-pound female and you take her for a 20-mile boat ride here or there. It's like, she's not necessarily going to be coming back down to the Green Bay Flats anytime soon. So kind of one of those things where just kind of limit the when you're fishing at certain times, so that you could put obvious stress on those fish.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll just say to reiterate, like both of John and Scott's comments, is like we never want to be in a position where we're trying to like regulate when and where people are fishing. We don't want to do seasonal closures. We don't want to do any of that. And to be honest, bass anglers have a really strong conservation ethic generally, and a lot of the stuff that has come around to increase fish health and tournaments has been driven by the community, and so. We don't really see a need to go there, and policing live wells is the last thing that we want to do. And so I think just being responsible, keeping your water clean, doing your best to keep bass healthy is huge.
And that's so important. And again, and this is what I've said when we've had river keepers on. If you're out there, if you see something, say something, take a video. If you think that something is amiss when it comes to the environment, a spill, it's so important to be able to do that. I mean, it's 2024. You have an iPhone 25. It can take really good video or picture. Don't just come back to the dock with, oh, this is what happened. Just take it, and then you can send it up the chain of command. Let's see, we got a couple more. What was the last one from? Oh, this is an interesting one. From Jesse. Jesse, you just want a gift card to Jake's Bait and Tackle. Message me, Facebook, Instagram, or email me, fishingthedmv@gmail.com. How is the relationship with Maryland DNR, the DC version, in regards to completing surveys?
Is Jesse Kirk the real name?
I have no idea.
Now that's actually a great question. So for many years, at times, Virginia Fisheries Management and Maryland Fisheries Management have had some philosophical differences in interpreting data that they have in hand, and have opted for different ideas about management strategies, is about as kindly as I can say it. And that led to some consternation among certain areas. And in an effort to try to work together and provide anglers with a better service and a better comprehensive, cohesive message, a number of years ago, Virginia and Maryland and DC started working together. And that's when we're out there. We were all tagging bass this year, all three entities, and is a regional project this is the upper tidal Potomac system we're speaking about. And to try to get a better handle and share information, share data. And, so I think one of the benefits to come out of that is that Maryland is doing electrofishing surveys now at a time of year when we're out there on the water. So we're seeing similar things. And I think that we're being able to pool our data, our information. And so it's a good thing we're working together now. And I think that the lines of communication are better, and we're able to help each other. And, because the constituents don't care, they're crossing the borders all the time, and they want to hear, what the status is of these fisheries. And so I think we've taken a pretty big step forward in coming up with a plan that will let these three different management agencies bring a result that is transparent and comprehensive and in agreement among the most important thing.
I had Martin Gary on, who is the executive secretary for the Potomac River Fishery Commission, before he moved, and it was just the bureaucracy thing of like how the Potomac is split up from three organizations. I mean, even that can be frustrating. Even if everybody's on the same page, it does make it very challenging when you have those kind of crisscrosses into it. So yeah, I completely understand sometimes the frustration with it. We got another good question here. We got two more, and then I think we are good to go. I'm not going to even try to pronounce your name, so apologies there. Is there a write-up of the major tidal rivers in VA, like Potomac, Nottoway, Shenandoah, James, something like that?
What happens is we compile reports every year of our data. So the best thing to do would be that person to reach out to each biologist that works his area or her area of interest and say, I fish a Shenandoah. Can you please share with me your most recent federal aid report? And every district does it a little bit different, but there's still some information that can be relayed that would be of value to somebody like that. And so, that person should just reach out. There's no place. Well, a lot of the information is on the website. If they go to the website and click under biologist reports or more information for that water, frequently there will be some stuff on that website. But if it's something that's not there, or they want to see if there's more recent stuff that maybe hasn't made it to the website yet, because we're not all the greatest about getting all our stuff to the webmaster in a timely fashion always, that they could reach directly out to the biologist responsible for that water of interest, and we could provide any information.
And then I also guide you guys to the department's Facebook page. That I know they might have an Instagram for updates when that information does get refreshed as well. Let's see. This is a fun one. John, you might want to take this one from Jacob M. Have y'all thought about adding smallmouth to Gaston to create a mean mouth population?
I'm going to refer that to Dan Michelson. He manages that lake, and he's not on here now, but contact Dan Michelson. He works out of the Farmville office.
Well, Gaston has all the problems with the Alabama bass, and they're just like, taking over like you won't believe down there. I've talked to fishermen, they're like, yeah, I caught 30 Alabama bass, fishing for crappie just on crappie jigs. And a lot of these Alabama bass and Gaston, these 10 to 12 inch fish. So, they are eating them. It's like, mind you that, an Alabama bass actually tastes way better than a largemouth bass. So I can recommend that. So if you do catch one and you're worried about, populations, this and that, eat the Alabama bass and don't throw it up on the bank for the raccoons. But definitely, Gaston's kind of one of those things where, population, we are seeing Alabama bass now in Bugs Island Lake, Dan Michelson, those guys. So, Johnny Fishy, they didn't magically hop their way over the dam there and get into bugs, but so people are moving fish around. We don't want people doing that. So that's definitely a problem. And you see Johnny Fish seeds working all over the place. So you got to be careful on that end.
John, I've talked to you about this. I've talked to an individual down at Auburn University that emphasizes drop jet. Is it true that Alabama bass and smallmouth, when they do cross, though, they become sterile? Like, it will push the smallmouth to extinction, correct?
Well, yeah, but not through sterility. They're basically just gonna outbreed, and they're gonna become more of a mutt, and so that's gonna keep exacerbating, and there will be no more pure smallmouth, but they're not sterile.
Good stuff. And then last question of the night, we did it. Let's see. What's the deal now with Chesden and crappie last fall? DNR said don't throw back as there was way too many.
Yeah, with Lake Chesden, it does produce some larger fish. Some of those crappie, mind you, are hybrids, the black-white crosses. People catch occasional 2.5, 3 pounder. I think the biggest one I've had my hands on, just 2 3/4 pounds. Definitely was a hybrid. Piles and piles of juvenile, smaller black crappie. They definitely hit the wall about 8.5 inches. And we have seen some fish that I aged out, odorless structures, 14.5-year-old fish, 8.25 inches. So I jokingly, air quotes, the bug eaters. So those fish are definitely not converted over to actually chasing juvenile bluegill or even juvenile gizzard shad. They're just sitting there eating macroinvertebrates their whole life, or they're like, I ate the one bluegill 2 years ago. It was amazing. I'm just going back to eating dragonfly nymphs. So it's kind of one of those things where we people, you still have the 25 crappie per person down there. It's not an open creel limit, but if people do want to eat those 8-9 inch fish, we recommend that. If you do catch larger fish out of Lake Chesden, primarily, those 2.5, 3 pound fish, those are some of the great brood stock. Is definitely would like to keep those in the system. That's not to say Chesden. I think somebody got about 313 a couple years ago. There was a 3.9 and a 313 caught within about a week and a half, 2 week period there, upper parts of the lake. So when it comes to smaller crappie, hey, get a sharp fillet knife and go to town on those 8 to 9 inchers, and you got to make your crappie burgers. You're not going to be make some fish tacos along the way too, but we definitely want people to eat some of those. And a lot of people don't want to mess with them, and so they wait until they catch a 12 or 13 inch black crappie, and that's not necessarily the case down there. Some of the tournaments that are hitting down there, the Richmond Crappie Club, some of those guys got dialed in with their forward facing sonar, so they can kind of figure out where some of those bigger fish are holding this and that, and catch them accordingly. But sometimes I went to the tournament weigh-in that they had last year at Seven Springs Marina, and I was just like, telling people you got to eat those 8-9 inch fish, and they looked at me kind of weird. And it's kind of one of those things where when it comes to those smaller fish, they're stacked up there, and definitely, I wish I had a nickel for every 8-inch crappie in Lake Chesden.
Thank you guys so much for all your questions. And, I'm really proud of my audience for staying here so long in the night for a very, very in-depth episode. Do y'all have any closing thoughts?
No, not really, Thomas.
Thanks for having us, Thomas. Thank you.
Thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate this. As always, guys, please link in the episode description I'll re-upload this tomorrow morning, so it'll be available on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and as well as YouTube. If you have any questions, link in the episode description to everything DWR related. If you DNR related, my apologies. Old habits die hard. And any questions besides that, please reach out to me and I'll hopefully get them answered. Like and subscribe to the channel, and we will see you next time on Fishing the DMV. Bye. You're listening to Fishing the DMV with your hosts, Thomas Ahrens and Jared Mounts. Fishing the DMV is brought to you by